Getting to that island was like fulfilling a dream we had nurtured for months. Far from any civilization, it promised perfect waves and the isolation we sought. After a long boat ride, we finally anchored on the small white sand beach. The sound of the ocean was the only noise surrounding us. No people, no cars, no urban noise. Just us and the sea. At first, the atmosphere was exactly what we expected. Peaceful and almost paradisiacal. However, there was something different in the air, something I couldn't quite define. Perhaps it was the absolute silence that, instead of calming me, made me uneasy. The wind was gentle, but the sound didn't seem to travel as it should. Around us, the dense, dark forest, even during the day, seemed to be watching us back. That feeling stayed with me as we set up camp. Tomas, always the practical one, quickly pitched the tents while Anna and Beatriz organized the boards and supplies. Felipe, as usual, was cracking jokes to lighten the mood. But no matter how hard we tried to stay upbeat, there was a weight in the air that seemed to defy explanation. I didn't say anything, but I couldn't shake the impression that we were being watched, even though no one was in sight. Something about the island was off. The first morning was all about surfing, and for a few hours, we managed to forget the uneasiness that had followed our arrival. The waves were perfect, just as we had hoped. Each of us caught our fair share of waves, and the laughter started flowing naturally. It was easy to believe this was just another fun, harmless adventure. But even in the best waves, I noticed Tomas constantly looking toward the treeline. It wasn't like him to get distracted so easily. Every break between waves, his eyes were fixed on the dense forest, as if he expected to see something. When I asked what he was looking at, he shrugged and said it was nothing. But it was obvious that he also felt something was off. Anna and Beatriz seemed quieter than usual too. Normally, Anna would always be laughing or arguing with Felipe about some surf trick. But that day, she barely spoke. And Beatriz, who always prided herself on being the calmest among us, seemed worried, her gaze drifting to the horizon. Felipe kept trying to lighten the mood with jokes, but the growing tension between us was something he couldn't dissipate. As the afternoon wore on, we started feeling the weight of the silence again. The sound of the waves, which had been soothing before, now felt muffled, as if something on the island was changing. When the sun began to set, the forest grew darker, and the discomfort between us returned. That night, after dinner, we decided to relax around the fire we had built on the beach. The flames cast distorted shadows on the sand, and the heat was a welcome relief after the cool wind coming off the ocean. Felipe kept talking non-stop, as usual, trying to keep the mood light, while I let myself be absorbed by the soft sound of the waves crashing. Anna was the first to hear it. She stopped talking abruptly and tilted her head, as if trying to pick up a distant sound. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. We all fell silent for a moment, and then I heard it. It was a song, faint but clearly coming from the direction of the forest. At first, I thought it could have been the wind passing through the trees, but the sound was almost melodic, like several voices harmonizing. It didn't make sense. Tomas was the first to break the silence with a nervous laugh. "Must be the wind." We tried to laugh it off, but the discomfort was palpable. We decided to ignore it and continue the conversation, but the song lingered. We didn't know what to think, so we clung to the simplest explanation, even though it didn't seem right. That night, lying in my tent, I couldn't stop thinking about that sound. Something was wrong. I knew it. I woke up to the soft sound of waves gently hitting the beach. For a moment, the song from the previous night felt like a distant dream, something my mind had conjured up in the stillness of the night. But then, when I stepped out of the tent, I saw something that immediately put me on high alert. A few meters from where we had set up camp, there was a fire. Not ours, but another, smaller one, whose embers were still smoldering. A chill ran down my spine. Tomas noticed it too, and when he approached to inspect it, he confirmed what I feared. "This was lit not long ago," he said, looking around suspiciously. Felipe tried to make a joke to lighten the tension, but no one laughed. We all knew what this meant. Someone, or something, had been there during the night while we slept. The inevitable question hung in the air, unspoken. Who had lit that fire? Tomas suggested that someone could have come by boat, exploring the island just like us, but the explanation felt forced. No one, on such an isolated island, would just appear out of nowhere. The feeling that we weren't alone, that something was watching us, grew even stronger. We tried to stay calm, but the idea of returning to the boat began to cross our minds. Something was watching us. The mood among us became more tense after discovering the fire. We tried to stick to our plan of exploring the island, but no one seemed truly interested anymore. Even surfing, which was supposed to be the highlight of the trip, had lost its charm. Anna, who was always the most excited to catch the best waves, was especially distant. Her eyes constantly drifted toward the forest, as if she was expecting to see something there. That night, after we quietly ate dinner around the fire, things took an even stranger turn. We were ready to sleep when we noticed that Anna was missing. At first, we thought she might have gone off for some privacy, but when she didn't return after a while, our worry began to grow. We spread out across the beach, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. Time seemed to drag until, suddenly, she appeared out of the darkness, walking slowly toward the camp. Her face was pale, and her eyes wide. I saw someone," she said, almost in a whisper. "There? In the forest." We asked what had happened, but Anna seemed unable to explain. She just kept repeating that she had seen a figure, a still shadow, watching. That night, none of us slept well. The tension reached its peak that last night. We were all asleep in our tents when a disturbing sound woke us up. It was a low, eerie laughter, as if several people were whispering, mocking us. I rushed out of my tent, heart racing, and saw Tomas and Felipe outside, looking confused toward the forest. "Are you hearing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. They nodded, eyes wide. The laughter was coming from all directions, and soon we noticed small flames moving among the trees. They were lights, like torches, slowly approaching. And then I saw them, dark figures, moving between the trees, surrounding our camp. Anna and Beatriz came out of their tents, panicked. We all knew we had to get out of there as quickly as possible. We ran toward the boat, the laughter echoing around us, the lights following us like predators stalking their prey. The feeling of being watched had never been more real. When we finally reached the boat, we pushed off the shore and sped away from the island as fast as we could. The figures disappeared into the darkness, but the sensation of being watched remained. The escape from the island was quick, but the sense of relief never came. Even when we were far enough and the laughter had faded, none of us spoke a word. We were all in shock, trying to make sense of what we had seen. Back on the mainland, we tried to move on with our lives, but nothing was the same. Anna stopped surfing. Tomas withdrew from the group. And me, every time I hear the wind or the waves crashing, I remember that song, the laughter, and the feeling that we are still being watched. Something from that island never truly let us go. I've always been fascinated by exploring remote places, especially those that hide stories and forgotten secrets. That morning, when I decided to follow the coordinates I had found on an old map, I had no idea what awaited me. Reaching the spot wasn't easy. The path was steep, covered with loose rocks, and surrounded by dry trees whose twisted branches seemed to form a natural barrier. But something about that landscape drew me in, almost as if it was inviting me to uncover its deepest secrets. When I finally found the entrance to the mine, hidden among the dense vegetation, a chill ran down my spine. It was a small opening, almost imperceptible, as if nature itself was trying to conceal what lay within. I hesitated for a moment. The air felt heavier there, and the silence was more oppressive than in any other place I'd explored. but I couldn't turn back. Something was pushing me forward. I entered the mine, feeling the cold, damp walls around me, and each step echoed in a way that unsettled me. The place seemed untouched, as if no one had set foot there in a long time. But that's exactly what motivated me. The unknown, the possibility of finding something no one else had ever seen. With each step I took, the natural light disappeared, and the air became denser. I turned on my flashlight and examined the stone walls. They were covered with ancient marks, as if dozens of pickaxes had chipped away at the rocks decades ago. I wondered if there might still be gold hidden among those stones. But then I noticed something else that piqued my curiosity. Strange symbols carved into the walls. They didn't look like tool marks, but rather some kind of inscription or primitive drawing. I kept walking, trying to ignore the growing sense of discomfort that enveloped me. There was absolutely no one there, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Perhaps it was the silence. Maybe it was the muffled echo of my own footsteps that confused me, but the sense that something was wrong was undeniable. Local legends about disappearances came to mind, but I quickly brushed them aside. After all, they were just stories, right? Just rumors meant to scare off explorers like me. I pressed on, my flashlight trembling slightly with each step as the air grew heavier and heavier. That's when I heard the first sound. Initially, it seemed like nothing more than the echo of my own footsteps. But as I stopped to listen more closely, I realized there was something else. A rhythmic, distant, almost muffled sound. It was like someone was striking a pickaxe against the rock somewhere deep in the mine. I stood still for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was the echo of a rock slide, I thought, or the wind. But the more I listened, the less it seemed like a natural sound. I kept walking, trying not to dwell on it, but the noise persisted, coming at irregular intervals. What made me stop again wasn't just the sound, but something that came along with it. Voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, just distant murmurs, as if they were coming from deep within the mine. The discomfort grew. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but the voices were there, insistent, whispering. I decided I had seen enough. The air felt heavier, the tunnel narrower. I started to head back towards the entrance, trying to shake off the growing paranoia. But as I approached the exit, a shock paralyzed me. Where there had once been an open passage, there were now rocks. Large boulders blocked the entrance completely. It wasn't a simple landslide. It was as if someone had deliberately sealed the entrance while I was inside. Panic surged through my body. I ran to the rocks, trying to push them aside, but they wouldn't budge an inch. It was impossible for this to have happened on its own. Who could have done this? And why? I started to sweat, the air around me growing thinner. The sound of pickaxes returned, louder now and much closer. The voices, too. They were no longer distant whispers, but indistinct words that seemed to be approaching me, echoing off the mine's walls. I looked around desperately, searching for another way out. Any passage, any tunnel that could lead me away from there. I sprinted down one of the side tunnels, my breathing erratic, the echo of my footsteps mingling with the sound of the pickaxes. My mind was torn between fear and confusion. Who was there? What did they want? With each step, the space around me seemed to close in. The mine's walls felt like they were closing in, and the sound of the tools followed my every move, as if someone was always just behind me. My desperation grew. What I had initially considered an adventure had now turned into a living nightmare. As I ran through the tunnels, a small crack in the wall caught my attention. The passage was narrow, but it seemed like my only chance to escape. Without thinking twice, I squeezed through, feeling the rough walls tear my shirt and scratch my arms. My lungs burned from lack of air, and my body was drenched in sweat, but I kept moving forward. After what felt like hours of crawling, the crack finally widened, revealing a small opening at the end. With my heart pounding, I threw myself outside, feeling the fresh air hit my face. But the relief didn't last long. As my eyes adjusted to the light outside, I realized I wasn't alone. A group of men stood silently watching me. Their faces were grim, their bodies robust, dressed in simple clothes and holding rudimentary tools, some of which looked like ancient pickaxes. It was as if they had been waiting for me. My body froze. That's when the truth hit me. They had been the ones to block the entrance to the mine. Everything made sense now. These men didn't want anyone exploring the mine. There was something inside that they were protecting, something they didn't want the outside world to know about. Their silence was terrifying, as if they already knew exactly what I had experienced inside. I tried to speak, to explain that I was just exploring and didn't know anything, but none of them said a word. They simply watched me, their eyes fixed on me, unreadable. One of them stepped forward and pointed to the horizon, signaling that I should leave. I didn't need any more convincing. Adrenaline took over my body as I ran off, not daring to look back. As I ran, my heart still pounded and my mind raced. What exactly were they protecting in that mine? Gold? Or something darker? Something that wasn't meant to be discovered? The questions haunted me. When I finally reached civilization, I decided not to tell anyone about what had happened. Who would believe me? Still, the terror of that experience lingers with me. I always wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found that crack. Maybe, deep down, I never truly escaped. The wind was blowing hard when we parked the car in front of the house. It was hard to believe we had found this place at such a great price. The view from the cliff was breathtaking. The ocean stretched as far as the eye could see, with waves crashing against the rocks below. It was exactly the kind of getaway Alex and I needed to disconnect from everything. Still, from the moment I stepped into the house, something felt off. Maybe it was the extreme isolation or the fact that the house seemed much larger than I imagined, but there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. While Alex eagerly explored every corner, I was immediately drawn to a small set of stairs leading to a door on the floor. It was locked with a rusty padlock, and there was no sign of a key nearby. It's just a basement, I thought, trying to brush off the uncomfortable feeling. But that locked door wouldn't leave my mind. Alex passed by me, smiling, completely oblivious to my unease. This place is perfect, isn't it? He spread his arms as if trying to embrace the whole scenery around us. I nodded, forcing a smile. As much as I wanted to enjoy it, something inside me wasn't at peace. By nightfall, the wind that had once felt refreshing now made the windows rattle, as if they were about to give in. The house, which was huge and full of windows, felt much more oppressive under the dim light of the old lamps. I had always known that Alex liked adventures, but being so isolated was making me anxious. We both wanted to relax, but how we disconnected was very different. He wanted to explore, walk along the trails, and go down to the beach below the cliff. I prefer to stay inside, maybe read a book, and simply watch the ocean through the window. During dinner, Alex suggested we walk down to the beach the next morning, which only heightened my unease. The trail was narrow and seemed dangerous. When I mentioned I didn't feel comfortable, he laughed and said I was being overly cautious. We didn't argue, but that small moment of tension lingered in the air like a mist, making the atmosphere even stranger. The night went on, and I went to bed with the sound of the wind howling outside, as if it was trying to warn us of something. Even under the covers, I felt like something was in the air. It wasn't exactly fear. It was something more subtle, a discomfort. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. The wind didn't let up, but what really woke me that first night wasn't the constant sound of the gusts against the windows. I had been lying there, almost drifting off to sleep, when I heard a distinct noise. Footsteps. It was hard to tell where they were coming from, as the wind muffled most sounds. I lay there, holding my breath for a moment, trying to listen more carefully. The footsteps were soft, as if someone was walking around outside the house. I glanced over at Alex, who was sound asleep beside me, completely unaware of what was happening. I didn't want to wake him unnecessarily, so I decided to investigate on my own. I got up slowly, my bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. I walked over to the nearest window, trying to peer through the glass. Outside, everything seemed still, except for the swaying trees on the cliff. The house was surrounded by a darkness that felt almost tangible. The strong wind made it difficult to make out anything. I watched for a few minutes but saw nothing. I returned to bed, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind playing tricks on my imagination. Yet, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I curled up under the covers, my muscles tense, and closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come, though I knew it wouldn't be easy. The next morning, the wind had calmed down, and Alex was excited to explore the trail down to the beach below the cliff. I, on the other hand, was still uneasy, my mind stuck on the noises from the previous night. I tried to ignore it and followed Alex. The trail was steep and uneven, but eventually, we reached the beach. The tide was low, leaving a vast stretch of sand exposed. While Alex inspected the nearby rocks, something caught my attention. There were footprints in the sand. At first, I thought they were ours, but I quickly realized they weren't. The prints were larger, deeper, and followed a straight line across the beach, as if someone had walked there during the night. "Alex, do you see this?" I asked, pointing to the footprints. He walked over, looking curious. "These aren't ours," he admitted, sounding surprised. What really disturbed me was the fact that the footprints didn't start or end anywhere. There were no signs of someone climbing up or down the cliff, and the beach was isolated enough that it was hard to imagine how anyone could have gotten there without being seen. Alex tried to brush it off, suggesting it could have been an animal or something harmless. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, and that only made my unease grow. When night fell, the noises started again. This time, they were louder, and even Alex began to notice. "Did you hear that?" he asked, frowning. I could only nod, my heart racing. The sound seemed closer now, and though still muffled by the wind, it was undeniable that something or someone was outside. We sat in silence, listening closely. The footsteps seemed to circle the house, pausing occasionally, as if whoever or whatever was out there was deliberately moving carefully. Alex got out of bed and headed to the front door, but I stopped him. "It's not safe," I whispered, feeling an urgency to keep him inside. The moments of silence between the sounds were even worse. It felt like the unknown outside was toying with us, waiting for us to relax before making another move. The windows rattled harder, and then, suddenly, everything went quiet. It was such a deep silence that I could almost hear my own breathing. Alex returned to the bedroom, looking uncomfortable, and we both lay back down, unable to sleep. I knew the tension was only beginning. On the third night, I woke up with an even stronger feeling that something was wrong. I looked out the window and saw a faint light flickering at the base of the cliff. My heart raced. What was that? I woke Alex immediately, and together we went to the front door. When we opened it, the cold wind hit us hard, and that's when we saw it. The footprints. They were back, but this time, they led straight to the front door of the house, as if someone had walked up to it and simply vanished. I looked at Alex, and he was pale. But the worst part was yet to come. The basement door, which had been locked before, was now wide open. The darkness below seemed to swallow everything. "We're not going down there," I said, my voice firm despite the panic rising inside me. Alex silently agreed. We knew something was terribly wrong. We quickly packed our things, ready to leave. But the wind outside was so strong it felt like it was trying to keep us there. The feeling that we weren't alone intensified. I didn't know if we'd make it through that night unscathed. The next morning, everything seemed to have returned to normal. The footprints had mysteriously vanished, and the light we had seen the night before was gone. The basement, which had been open, was locked again, as if nothing had happened. Still, Alex and I knew we couldn't stay there another minute. We packed our bags in silence and left the house in a hurry. The drive back was quiet. The wind that had once howled around us seemed to have stayed behind, trapped in that house. But what had happened there didn't leave us. I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints. How had they appeared, disappeared, and, most disturbingly, how had they gotten so close to us without anyone being seen? It was like we had been watched the entire time. Alex seemed disturbed as well, though he tried to mask it, convincing himself that everything had a logical explanation. But I knew something far beyond our understanding had taken place in that house. Years later, I still think about that place. What would have happened if we had stayed one more night? And, even more unsettling, who, or what, left those footprints and opened that basement door? Recently, I heard that other couples who rented that same house reported strange feelings, as if someone was watching them. Something in that house is still waiting, still watching, and no matter how much I try to forget, I know the terror we experienced there will never fully go away. The salty air hit my face as soon as Lizzie and I parked the trailer near the base of the lighthouse. We had driven for hours to reach this desolate coast, where you could hardly see another soul. The idea of exploring such a remote place had always excited me, and honestly, I was thrilled. But Lizzie? Not so much. She had been unusually quiet since we left town, and I knew something was bothering her. "I think this is going to be amazing," I said, trying to lift her spirits as we unloaded our bags. The lighthouse, with its weathered stone tower, looked untouched, abandoned, the kind of place that tells stories just by standing there. Lizzie shot me a hesitant look. "You heard what that old man said in town, didn't you? About an incident?" I rolled my eyes and shrugged. "It's probably just some small-town tale. You know how lighthouses are full of legends." I tried to sound casual, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. The lighthouse, with its dark windows, seemed to be watching us. Even with the constant sound of waves crashing against the rocks, the silence around us felt strange. There was something in the air, a stillness that didn't seem to fit. Night fell quickly, as it often does in such isolated places. Sitting around the campfire, we watched the flames crackle, but the wind was colder than we had expected. Lizzie pulled her coat tighter around her, and I did the same. The lighthouse, now shrouded in darkness, looked even more imposing. "I can't stop thinking about that incident," she murmured. "What if something really did happen here?" I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Liz, it was probably just some accident. A story they told to attract curious tourists." As I spoke, a light flashed in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, and there it was. The lighthouse. Its light was flashing intermittently, as if it were working again, but that didn't make any sense. I clearly remembered seeing signs of abandonment all over the structure when we arrived. "Tom, the lighthouse is on?" Lizzie's voice wavered. A chill ran down my spine. "This isn't supposed to happen. It's been deactivated, remember?" I shook my head, confused. "It's probably some old automatic system malfunctioning. You know, something ancient still running." Lizzie didn't respond, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I believed my own words. The campfire was almost out when we first heard it. A low, almost imperceptible sound, like something was tapping against the lighthouse. Lizzie and I exchanged quick glances. She pulled her coat tighter while I stood up to listen more closely. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, trying to make sense of the sound. Maybe it was the wind, I thought. But then the noise came again, louder and clearer. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps coming from inside the lighthouse. The sound echoed, as if someone was walking in there. "Let's check it out," I suggested, perhaps trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Lizzie hesitated, but eventually got up as well. I grabbed the flashlight, and we started walking toward the tower. The closer we got, the stronger the wind seemed to blow, and the lighthouse continued flashing, almost as if it was warning us of something. We reached the metal door of the lighthouse, and I tried turning the knob. It was locked, as it should be. But the noises continued, now muffled, as if something was happening on the other side of the door. Lizzie stepped closer, but I pulled her back. "It's just the wind," I said, without much confidence. Even so, we returned to the trailer. The feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger. The lighthouse was watching us. Lizzie was trying to sleep, but I knew she was restless. So was I. Every little noise outside seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. The footsteps, the flashing light from the lighthouse. None of it made sense, and my mind was starting to race. I kept trying to convince myself that there was a logical explanation for everything, but something inside me screamed that there was more to this situation than we were seeing. And then it came. The sound. This time, it wasn't the lighthouse or the wind. It was something closer. Footsteps again, but now they were outside the trailer. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt Lizzie clutch my arm, wide awake and terrified. "There's someone out there," she whispered, her eyes wide. I got up slowly and walked to the window. The trailer was enveloped in darkness, but I could make out the silhouette of the lighthouse in the distance. The light was still flashing, spinning in erratic intervals, but something else caught my attention. The door to the lighthouse, which had been locked before, was now open. A slight breeze pushed it back and forth, making a soft, grating sound as metal scraped against stone. That wasn't like that before. I murmured to myself. Lizzie stood up, still reluctant. "What's happening, Tom? We need to get out of here." I knew she was right, but something stopped me from running. A dark curiosity. "I'm going to check it out," I said before she could stop me. I grabbed the flashlight again and, against all my instincts, started walking toward the lighthouse. Each step was a test of my nerves. The sound of the wind between the rocks, the lighthouse flashing, the open door beckoning me inside. When I reached the entrance, the air was cold, much colder than it should have been. I looked inside and saw only darkness. But what scared me the most wasn't what I saw. It was what I heard. A slow, heavy breathing, as if someone was right there inside, waiting for me. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing inside the lighthouse. I wanted to move, but my legs were heavy, frozen by the fear that gripped me. The flashlight shook in my hand as I shined it up the narrow staircase leading to the top of the tower. The sound of the breathing, low and deep, was coming from somewhere above. Against my better judgment, I started to climb. Each step felt harder than the last. The air grew thicker as I ascended, like something invisible was weighing me down. When I finally reached the top, my stomach churned. The lighthouse's beam was spinning above, but on the floor, there was something that made me stop. An old, rusted lantern sat lit in the corner. Next to it, there were drag marks on the floor, as if something or someone had been pulled across the ground. My body tensed, and the feeling of being watched returned full force. The breathing was louder now, and I could swear it was coming from all around me. The lighthouse's light, which had been flashing intermittently until now, suddenly stopped. The oppressive silence that followed was suffocating, and darkness closed in around me. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. I quickly spun the flashlight around, trying to catch a glimpse of the source of that breathing. But all I saw was emptiness. I had to get out. I started down the stairs as fast as I could, my heart racing. Something was behind me. I could feel it. I raced down the lighthouse stairs, nearly tripping on the narrow steps. The sound of heavy breathing followed me, growing closer with every step. When I finally burst through the door, I sprinted back to the trailer. Lizzie was already inside, pale and terrified. "Let's get out of here," I shouted, and she didn't hesitate. We drove without stopping until we reached the nearest town, the silence hanging thick between us. Even after we were safe, I couldn't shake the lighthouse from my mind. The following nights were filled with nightmares of breathing and footsteps that, somehow, still followed me.